Hi guys, and welcome to The Psychologist. Today I wanted to go through the hand setting procedure on a Seiko 6139 chronograph. This particular model is a Seiko 6139 7030, and I'm just going to talk about some of the problems you can encounter when setting hands on a Seiko chronograph, some of the things that go wrong, some of the things you see out there when you purchase one, when you get one serviced by somebody, and some of the things to really make sure of. There are a lot of incorrect ways to set the hands on a watch, and there's really one correct way. Now, when we're setting hands on a watch, there's a few things that we really need. First, we need a good quality movement holder with a supporting stake for our seconds hand. And it's good to have, for a Seiko chronograph, it's good to have pushers as well, so that we can have an ability to start, stop, and reset our chronograph pushers. A big shout out to my friend Adrian from Vintage Time Australia. He actually makes these movement holders for the 6138s and 6139s, and they do a fantastic job. There was a comment on one of my other videos about the movement holder not being particularly good. Now, the reason the movement holder wasn't working very well in that previous video that I showed was because I was using it actually incorrectly. I knew that, I just didn't have the dial ring on, and it requires the dial ring to be in place for this movement holder to work properly. But I was just using it not exactly correctly, we should say, but it is in fact a very good movement holder. Now, why is this little post or dowel important? Well, this is movable. You can put an Allen key in there and you can adjust it. Now, this particular one is set for my 6139 here. The reason it's so important is because when we go to fit our seconds hand, which you can see on there right now, we push quite a lot of pressure as we fit our seconds hand, and what will happen is if we use too much pressure, we'll actually push this jewel out here. Now, if we push this jewel out, we're going to have to dismantle half the watch and fix what we've made, fix the mistake we've made, refit the jewel, and go through a whole bunch of rigmarole, basically. So what we do is this jewel here sits up against, let's just put this in place. This jewel here sits up against this post, and when we push our seconds hand down, we can push as hard as we like. We're not going to push that jewel down. So we can see that when we go to set our hands, our movement holder fits pretty well. The next thing we're going to need is a good pair of tweezers. Now, a lot of people, particularly people that you'll find that fix Seikos for maybe not too much money, they'll use steel tweezers, or they'll use I guess brass tweezers. They can be used, but they're not great. The best thing to use is a pair of carbon fiber tipped tweezers. The reason we want to use these is because they're soft and they don't do any damage, and they help us. We can touch the hands with them. We can move the hands, and they're not going to cause any issues, cause any marks or things like that. So it's important to have a good quality pair of carbon fiber tweezers when we're setting our hands. The next thing we're going to need is hand pushers. You see here we have different types of hand pushers. We'll move that out of the way. Or we want something like this. Something like this is a bit more of a substantial thing where we can set our movement up and push our hands down. So we set our movement up like so, and we can put it in the right spot, and we can press our hands down like so, and it gives us a nice even spacing, and it keeps everything nice and straight and flat. The other thing we're looking for when we set hands, or if you're looking for a particular watch, or you've just bought a watch, or your watch has just been for service, is to make sure that hands are nice and parallel. We can see that we don't want one hand pushed down towards the dial, or one hand pushed up. We want everything to be nice and parallel. Now, there are going to be small differences when it comes to hand setting. There might be slight changes, but generally speaking, we want all our hands to be parallel. We can see that there's some slight up and down. We could move our minute hand down slightly, possibly. We could move our seconds hand down slightly, but generally speaking, all hands are pretty parallel. We also want to make sure that no hands are touching the dial. because that can do damage to the dial. So we want to make sure specifically the minute counting hand isn't touching the dial. Now, these are all common things that we unfortunately see when it comes to vintage watches, vintage Seikos. The reason we see it a lot with vintage Seikos is because people think, oh, it's just a Seiko, so I'll take it to here to get serviced, or I'll take it there, and then someone does a less than reputable job, and it causes a lot of chaos with the watch. The other thing we need to check to make sure our hands are set correctly is the alignment. Do you see that it is now 4 o'clock? Now, imagine our minute hand is at 12 here and our hand is off like that. Well, that's no good to us. We need everything to be in alignment. When our minute hand is at 12, we need our hour hand to be in the middle of the marker that it's representing, like we can see here. We set it at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock is usually a pretty good gauge for us. Set it at 6, and we can see that our minute hand is pointing at 6 o'clock. Always also good to check at 3, and then we can obviously check again at 12. The other thing we need to check is the quick date. Now, we want to check quick date when our hands are in the southern hemisphere. So if our hands are in the northern hemisphere, above the 3 and the 9, we don't want to engage our quick date because we might be too close to midnight. In this case, we're not. I know we're not, but it's always safe to move the hands into the bottom of the dial, and then we can check our quick date. We can check the date, and we push in lightly, make sure that's functioning correctly, and then we can push in hard, and we can make sure the day and the date's working. The next thing we want to check is the date change. Now, we want our date to change around 12 o'clock. There can be slight discrepancies and slight differences. We can see there that the time changed at a few minutes too. We also notice that our day changes much later. Now, a couple of schools of thought here. Some people like to have the date change around here, and then around 1 o'clock or around 11 o'clock, and then around 1 o'clock, the day will change over. Personally, I like to have the date change as close to midnight as possible, and then I like to have the day change a couple of hours later. That's always the way I've set things up. So we can see that there are going to be differences when it comes to setting our day and our date. If we move around further, for example, we can see that there will be slightly different times when our day and our date changes over. We can see it was about 7 minutes to at one point. Now, if we go around now and we keep moving around, we can see that it's 3 minutes to. So there are going to be discrepancies. There's a lot going on in these watches. Something like a Rolex is going to be a bit more instantaneous than a vintage Seiko, but generally we want it to be around the 12 o'clock mark. So we can keep going again, and we're at 5:02. So to be honest, if we keep going around, keep checking, be able to see again. We're at 1 minute to there. So there is some discrepancies when it comes to date change. We'll just really labor the point home here. And again, that was pretty much at 12. So there are discrepancies when it comes to date changes, but that's nothing really to worry about in these vintage Seikos. It's fairly normal. Now, probably the most important thing to check when it comes to hand setting is our snapback. Once we start our chronograph, we can see that our seconds hand starts running. Now, we'll manually intervene and move our minute hand around like so. Now, we want to make sure that when we stop the chronograph or try to reset the chronograph with it running, that doesn't work because we don't want that to happen. This is not a flyback, and that can cause a lot of chaos. Stop our chronograph, reset. We can see that we're nicely in the middle there. Let's start our chronograph again. We can check our minute hand again. And we can reset. Now, depending on how I hold it is going to look slightly different, but generally that's when it's straight onto the camera, it's straight up at 12 o'clock. One thing we want to look for when resetting hands is these have a square pipe. They don't have a square pipe, they have a round pipe, but they have a square chronograph. The chronograph wheel has a square pivot on it, and they mate to the hand. A lot of the times these can come loose. People cut the square out and they put it back and they're loose, and then they reset to a different time each time, and they reset to a different spot. They might reset to there, they might reset slightly off, they might reset wherever, because of a loose pipe. And obviously we want to make sure that they always reset to 12 o'clock. Now, I've heard people service watches and they've said, oh, that's just how it is, it's an old watch. That's not how it is. There are definitely ways to fix that. New hands are available, original hands. If we need to get those, we can get those. I have some in stock, but generally it can usually be fixed. And saying that it's just an old watch is really not an acceptable solution when it comes to that. So hopefully now, when you're purchasing a new Seiko chronograph, well, not new, but a vintage one, new to you, you have a better idea of what to look for, the things to see whether a watch has been serviced well, because these are all things that you as the consumer, whether it's gone to a watchmaker or you've recently bought the watch, you can tell to see if they've done a good job or not, because watchmaking's an unregulated trade. There's a lot of hacks out there, as I'm sure a lot of you guys will know. You've probably learned the hard way when it comes to servicing. But there are correct procedures to do things, and you can pretty much fix most things on a vintage watch and have them working as intended. So thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. You can also check out me on Instagram. I'm at The Seikologist. You can also check out my website, theseikologist.com, for hints, tips, tricks, and all things related to Seiko. So thanks, and until next time.